Hi, my name is Laurence Brock. I'm going to talk to you about my near-death experience and some of the other amazing mystical, magical experiences that I've had. I guess to really understand my story, you have to understand it happened in 1976, and I had never heard of a near-death experience. I had some, interactions with spiritual things, but most of my things in my head about it were from watching Star Trek, the original Star Trek series. But the not knowing, I knew I had this experience, but I didn't know what to think about it. I didn't have any words for it at all. And it ended up and still is a blessing, that not knowing in the beginning, because it prompted me to really want to know and learn a lot and find a lot of people to study and read a lot of books. And now I'm in the habit of doing that. So it was back in 1976. I was 22 years old. I actually just turned 70 June 27th. And I had been living in Colorado in the United States. My roommate was also where I grew up was in the northeast of the United States in Rye Brook, New York. And we decided to go back and visit our parents. We drove, he had a 280Z, this really nice driving car. We drove straight back from Colorado to Rye Brook, New York. And home early in the morning, I remember, and he dropped me off at my parents' house and he went to his parents' house. We were going to rest and we agreed to connect later. I think he was the one who found out that there was a party. So we decided to go to this party from a friend from high school, and we were there. It was a great party. Music, loud music. The house was so packed. It was, you had to push through crowds to get through there. So there was music, dancing, drinking, smoking pot. And we're thinking of going, and I kind of came up with this plan that I would tell the woman having the party that I was too high to drive and I would leave my car there and go back the next day. I told her to pick up my car. I was planning on going back to try to connect with her and ask her out on a date. So my friend took me in his car. We were almost all the way back. The party was in Mamaroneck, New York, and my parents lived in Rye Brook. We were almost back to my parents' house, and I realized my sister needed the car the next day. So I explained to my friend that I was just faking about being too high to drive, and he took me back to the party. I remember walking through the crowds to go tell, I think her name was Anne, and it's funny the things that I do remember and what I don't. And I remember walking through the crowd to leave the party. I remember approaching the front door and have a little bit of a flash of walking on the walkway toward my car, but I don't remember getting in my car. The next thing I remember, I was out of my body, all white light all around me, looking down. The car was smashed. It was a Ford Bobcat, and it was smashed. After I got out of the hospital, I went back to see the car, and it was smashed. It was hard to believe I survived of how little room there was in there. My mom took a picture of the car, a little Polaroid. I don't know where it is though. I've never been able to find it the last few years. So I was in the white light looking down. My body was leaning against a tree like this with my legs straight out. My head was smashed open, blood. A police officer was crouching over me. I assume he pulled me out of the car, but I never verified that. Behind me, there was a circle of white light, and in there was a full silhouette. I assume a man. It had a man's voice. So I couldn't really see the details of the figure, and it was behind me, but I was able to see back there. The thing that really stood out for me was how it felt. So it felt very peaceful. And even as I say this energy like comes in through my body, and I could easily just start to meditate right away. But I know I'm here to talk. So seeing my body smashed, seeing the car smashed, everything felt like it was okay. There was this feeling of, it was like being in a cloud in a certain way, but it just felt so nice. I'm a very kinesthetic person, so how things felt were really important. There was also a knowing and a loving and a caring. There wasn't much information in my head as far as words, but it was a feeling of knowing a lot. I'm not really sure how long it was, But at some point, the being behind me said, "You have to go back. Your father wants you to stay." From the perspective of everything seemed so good, I just went back into my body and came to 3 days later in the hospital. I had a couple of glimpses of almost waking up over those 3 days, but just like flashes of white suits walking by, either doctors or nurses. So I came to, I knew I had this experience, didn't know what to think about it, never heard of a near-death experience. I know that phrase was coined around that time, but I did not know of it. So I didn't know what to do with that, what happened to me. So I basically went back. After I was well enough, I moved back out to Colorado and worked. I had been working in a restaurant. I worked there for a little while longer. Even before my near-death experience, I was feeling kind of antsy and I liked working in the restaurant. I loved being a cook. I worked my way up from dishwasher up to second chef over a couple of years, but it didn't feel fulfilling. I was thinking of going back to school. Some other ideas were brewing in my head. And then my mom kind of bribed me. She bribed me. She bought me a brand new Jeep and convinced me to move back to the Northeast and work in my dad's electrical contracting business, which I had I grew up in the electrical contracting business, so I knew how to do electrical work. Obviously, I still do. A lot of it was business stuff, estimating, purchasing, and stuff like that. So I had this thing going on inside of me. There was a bit of a struggle where part of me was very, very curious about spiritual things, but didn't know what to do about it all. So my mind was, go to work. I had a job, live your life. Something happened, a synchronicity that happened that until a couple of years ago, I didn't realize how amazingly awesome this was because I was sitting in my apartment. I was living in Tarrytown, New York, and someone knocked on the door, and I got up and answered it. There was a beautiful woman at the door, and she said, "I'm a sister of a good friend of yours from Colorado, and my sister told me some interesting things about you." Now, her sister was one of the people I mentioned my experience to, not using the word near-death experience, but trying to tell her what my experience was. And the woman at the door said, "I know someone who's a Sufi sheikh, a spiritual teacher, who teaches about what happens after we die, and I want to introduce you to him." So this woman just showed up, and in a certain way, her showing up and me meeting this person changed my life just as much as having the near-death experience because I did not know what to do. Some things did change in me during my near-death experience. One thing that there was no denying, and it still happens, is when I touch someone, my hands become very warm quickly. Now I know I've learned how to use that to help people heal, but back then it just seemed like kind of a weird thing. I also had this curiosity, but just really strong desire and learn about this, and synchronicity started to happen. So this woman introduced me to this Sufi sheikh who I ended up studying with for about 10 years. And when he first started to talk to me, I started to understand in my mind, having words understand mentally what happened during my near-death experience. So he was an Islamic teacher. I was born in a Jewish family, but he started to talk to me about Mary. And he talked about how open Mary was to God's love. And as soon as he said this to me, I just understood that what I felt in my near-death experience was God's love. And that during the near-death experience, I experienced that same openness that he talked about. And, after having time to think about it, I realized I was just open because my body, my ego, all these things that are part of the physical reality weren't in the way of me experiencing this love. Then he talked to me about Jesus. And as soon as he said Jesus, like I just knew that being behind me was Jesus telling me I have to go back. So I studied for 10 years with him. He started to teach me how to utilize the heat that came in my hand. I just learned a lot of different great things from him. He was a real jokester and would always joke around. Usually when I would ask him a question about anything, he would say, "You don't need to know that." And that kind of fed more into the part of not knowing, my near-death experience happened. I learned that knowing is a way of being open to learning spiritual things. Spiritual things are way beyond what my mind can understand. I learned how to do dowsing with him, like how to find, he was really good at finding water, working on energy meridians on the earth. But he would always tell me, even though he was teaching me that, he said, for me, it was learning how to find imbalances in the body. He also taught me how to use a pendulum for a very similar thing. I had some very mystical, magical experiences with him. One of them, he was teaching a class in St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan, and I asked him if I could take the class, and he said, no, you would not understand it. And he was right. Asked him a few times, and finally said, you could come and be my assistant and basically sweep the floor, carry his suitcase, his briefcase, organize the chairs and take care of needs of anyone in the class. Definitely, when I was there and saw what he was teaching, I'm very smart in math, but I did not understand what he was talking about. During one of the breaks, he said, come on into my office, again, joking around. He didn't have an office there, but there was a little room off to the side, and he said, here, give me your hands. So he grabbed both my hands in his hands. Then he said, there, you got it. What do you mean? And he just didn't answer me. Then I started to walk away. And he said, nope, give me your hands again. He goes, there, now you got it. And he grabbed my hands again. After that, I noticed more of a purpose in the heat and the energy that would come into my hands when I touch people. And there was a lot of learning with him, but again, not always knowing the words to go along with it. Something happened during the time I was spending time with him. I started to learn how to do polarity therapy. And this is a hands-on healing method. And when I started to do that, that's when I understood in my kinesthetic way, in my body, and more of a feeling and a deep knowing than necessarily mentally words, that the energy I got in my near-death experience could help heal people. And I've been doing that ever since. Something has been unfolding in me still after all these years, and I'm just trying to follow along with what it is. I've compared it to being in a movie and not having a script and trying to figure out what to do by the way I felt and what's going on out in the world. I did have some experiences that the healing energy just really came in. So again, just to understand, healing not in my mind at all. The only thing would be Star Trek. And, in one way, when I'd see these sci-fi things, I'd think, oh, I could do that. But I knew it was just kidding myself. But I thought they weren't even real. Now I know that they are real. But something happened. There was my next door neighbor growing up. And so there was a kid who was my age, who I was friends with. His father and his grandfather are part of the story. So I was talking to my friend's father, and he was telling me how sick his father was, that he was going to pass away any moment, basically. And I said, something in me urged me to say this, because in my mind, I thought it was almost like ridiculous. And I just said to him, I'll pray for him. I did pray for him. Again, that knowledge, wisdom, knowing that's in me kind of urged me to do that. And I felt something happen. I just said a simple prayer like, dear God, please help him. And I felt it was like a click. And I felt something happened. Again, I just dismissed it, not knowing anything about this stuff. Then a couple of days later, I saw my friend's father, and he said to me, I think something happened when you prayed, because my father, his father, my friend's grandfather, got so much better that day. And that was one of the first experiences that I had that really, showed this to me in a way that it's no denying it. So I stayed in the electrical contracting business for a while. I started studying polarity. I learned things from the Sufi Sheikh. One day, all of a sudden, I realized I was sick of being in the electrical contracting business. Some of the jobs were great. You made a lot of money. I liked doing the intellectual part of it. And when you work for a good person, it's great. A lot of the jobs had a lot of men arguing about money in it. So I decided to start my practice. I didn't even know what to call what I did. And I started it. I did a manifesting technique, or kind of put some together that I've learned to use, and my practice started pretty quickly and easily, and it's great. I've had so many great, wonderful experiences. So I've learned how to work with people. I work with people all over the world via Zoom. There are these beings in spirit that I can connect with. And as soon as I start to say that, I feel all this heat starting to come in. So it is like me observing what's going on and trying not to think about it too much and let it happen. And when I see positive things happening for myself, for the people I'm working with, that is a good thing. I do meditate almost every day. I do journal writing almost every day too. I do Tai Chi, do yoga. I do things to keep myself clear energetically. And there's still a lot of learning in how to connect to God more, how to be in my spiritual loving, how to see good things, gratitude. I guess the synchronicities, the desire in me just is so present, and still I watch these amazing things. I mean, just thinking of some people, there was this woman not too long ago who had one session with me. And when I work with people, a lot of energy comes in. A lot of times it's in colors. In her case, it was yellow, which is pretty common. And I think she was in Utah somewhere. I'm in New Jersey. So a lot of yellow. And she was having problem walking. She basically spent all her time in her apartment. And it seemed like a really good session, but I didn't see any physical healing happening right then. I don't know how much longer later, a few weeks later, I got a message from her saying, I want to make another appointment. The energy really shifted. I'm able to walk now. And I haven't been able to walk in 8 years. And I was like, wow, this was, again, this energy from my near death experience, the love, the caring, the knowing is just quite miraculous. So I encourage people to meditate and do journal writing. Just trying to think of another story that I could tell. I have had this person a while ago, and it was good because it was interesting because he reached out to me, and he sounded very sarcastic the whole time, and he was very tough. And when I tried to talk to him, he gave me a hard time. So everything I said to him, he was telling me it wasn't true. I mean, when I work with people, I know what I see. And I know that it's true, but I try to be gentle and approach it. So he had a couple of, or 2 or 3 sessions with me. I don't even remember. It was one of those times I was surprised he continued, because the way he talked to me was like he didn't believe it and it wasn't doing anything. Then I got an email from him saying that his blood pressure, which was extremely high, had gone to normal. Then he said something like, do you think this was your session? I do. And it was just very rewarding because he was kind of tough to work with, and those are great things. The part of the love and the caring that's present in God. And I've really developed my journal writing. It's something I've been doing for years, and I do it. It's unusual if I see one time in a month that I haven't done it. So, because I do it online and there's a list, it always shows all the days next there. But that is really important. So I do spend time journal writing about my spiritual experiences, things I'm grateful for, the things I've done well, the qualities. We are blessed from God with our divine nature through our positive qualities, whatever that is for you. If it's being creative, like I like to cook, if you're strong, you can do physical labor, you can, whatever it is, that is a gift from God. And it is important to focus on that and be grateful for that. I was just looking at some videos I made right after my dad died a couple of years ago, and it was pretty interesting because he died when he was 92. Until he was like 91 3/4, he seemed perfectly healthy, and you would have never guessed how old he was. But he deteriorated very quickly, and I was just remembering the time I spent with him. He lost his voice as soon as he started to be sick, and he was very frustrated. So I would spend time with him meditating. He couldn't barely talk, and he would just grab my hand and kiss my hand to show his loving. And It was just so nice. When I was young, my dad wasn't a very nice guy. And when he got to be in his 80s, I realized I should spend time with him. Plus, he met a woman that he really loved, and it changed his emotional attitude towards me. So I was really glad to share that with him. Plus, to see after he passed away that in the spirit he was so happy, because he was not happy. He was very social and his voice went. At the end, he could barely move around. It was like he was so happy to pass away, like he was like a little kid running all over the place in the spirit. In the description, you can see my YouTube channel and my website. There's ways to get in touch with me. And on my website, there's ways to make appointments with me if you'd like to do that. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I always love to share this wonderful story that kind of happened to me and has propelled my life into being very spiritual. Thank you very much.